And so, Joe, please take it away and give yourself an introduction, or at least give us an introduction to you. And then I think we'll have you present for 10 or 12 minutes on this topic, and then jump into some Q&A so that we can fill you with questions.
Well, thanks. Hey, everyone. As Taylor mentioned, my name is Joe Rivest. I started a company called Tyndall, which does privacy solutions and privacy consulting for companies that are trying to comply with privacy laws. So Taylor asked if I'd talk today about how privacy laws are impacting business. And boy, that's what I do every day. So I was happy to do that. So we don't have a lot of time. We're going to keep it pretty short. So I'm just going to quickly cover a couple of the key issues about privacy. And then if you're interested or you want to look at anything more specifically, I'm going to provide Hannah with a doc that she can send out to everyone. It's got a lot more detail. It's got links to supporting documentation if you want to learn about the different laws, or, of course, whatever, you're always welcome to reach out. I love privacy. And as you can tell from me being here today, I'm always happy to talk about it. And also, I'm happy to have questions at the end, but I'm also plenty fine if people just want to interrupt. I find a lot of times it's better if you just interrupt if a question pops into your head than waiting to the end and you forget what your question was anyway. So if you want to jump in, you got a question, just jump in and interrupt me. It's fine. I begin every presentation with the statement that from a business perspective, at least, privacy and privacy laws really aren't so much about secrecy as really they're about transparency. And to me, that's really about respecting people and their choices about how their personal information is used. So with that as a backdrop, of course, the issue is that putting systems in place to be transparent as a business and to respect people's choices really doesn't come without costs. And of course, not complying with privacy laws can cost a lot more than that. So this slide highlights just some of the penalties that are defined in the 6 existing laws in the United States. We'll talk some more about other ones, but there's 2 important things really that I just want to point out about this. I'm not looking for you to read all the details in this slide, but the first thing is that the fines, each state there lists different fines, but they're per violation. And one issue that might come up usually involves multiple violations. And the way these states work is that a violation can be, if you have 3 violations for one particular issue over 30 days, well, then that's 90 violations. And if you have 100,000 people in your database, then that's 90 times 100,000, and that's how many violations. So we're not talking $7,500. We're talking millions and millions of dollars. So just bear that in mind. And the second thing that I wanted to point out about this slide, that second row, you don't need to read it, but basically what it says is California allows class action lawsuits about this stuff. The other states says they don't, but at least so far, California allows class action attorneys to, if they find that you had a breach and you weren't complying with the California privacy law, then everybody who lives in California can join a class action lawsuit against you. Anyway, just so you know. Oh, my circles are animating, sorry. All right, so that brings us to the Sephora case. I thought I would just use as a highlight. A lot of people have heard about it, but not a lot of people understand what was actually going on and why Sephora got in trouble. Sephora had 3 violations. They weren't posting the "do not sell my personal information" button. That's a direct quote from the law. Basically, it's just if you sell people's information, you have to disclose that, which is number 2, and then you have to allow them to opt out of it, which is that number 1. And then you have to have appropriate contracts in place with everyone that you share information with. We're not going to get any of those details. One thing I'll highlight is that this particular case, one of the things that was called out is that Sephora wasn't honoring what's called a GPC signal, so global privacy control. We're not going to talk about it much, but just so you know, GPC is a plugin in some browsers, very small percentage of browsers, Mozilla and Firefox mostly, that people can set a privacy control that says, I want to opt out of all, don't sell my information anywhere. So anytime they go to your site, you're supposed to get that signal and say, oh, they're opting out of the sale. And Sephora wasn't doing that. Now, truth is, nobody's doing that because as you can see, Safari, Chrome, Edge that have 66, 19, 4% of the web traffic don't support it. Only Firefox, Mozilla Firefox does, which only 3% or less of the traffic. So talking a very small percentage. But the whole point with Sephora, if I want to go back here, the settlement, remember I said it's not just one violation for $7,500, as it said. They settled for 1.2 million. So the violations would have been much, much more than that. So you're not talking a $7,500 fine, but 1.2 million and 2 years of monitoring and reporting. So they have to have the government looking over their shoulder for 2 years, monitoring their privacy program, which is probably going to cost more than the $1 million. But anyway, that's just sort of why should we care? Why do I even care about privacy? Well, because it can really cost you a lot of problems and get you in the press and everything. The wave of privacy laws, that was kind of the second point that we were going to talk about and that somebody mentioned earlier. I think it was in our breakout, but 2020, 10% of the world's population was covered by privacy law. So Europe and California. Gartner's predicting by the end of 2023 that 65% of the entire world's population is going to be covered by various privacy laws. And that leads us to the slide that you're not supposed to read, but really just to make a point. This is a partial list of the laws and the proposed laws just in the United States. And as small as that print is, I couldn't fit the whole list on here. But you're not really supposed to read it. I just wanted to give you an idea of what I mean by a wave of coming privacy laws. The link is there. That'll be sent out. I recommend, if you want to go to the IAPP's website and pull that up, they track all the bills on a monthly basis. But the point is the green are the ones that are passed. The blue are the ones that are getting close. The ones underneath there are pending or on hold, or their legislatures are out of session right now. But the important thing that I want to point out about this slide isn't necessarily just that there's a lot of laws coming, although that's important. The real important point about this slide is the only reason that so many states have pending privacy laws or already passed privacy laws is because this has become a huge issue for the American people, right? People are getting to the point where they're like, hey, wait a minute, I should have a right to tell you I don't want you selling my information, and you should actually have to listen to me. Because in the United States, that isn't a thing. If someone wants to sell your name, they can sell your name, right? But people are kind of getting to the point where they're like, hey, wait a minute, you shouldn't be able to if I don't want you to. And you should have to tell me what you're doing with my information. It shouldn't be some kind of a secret or I don't know about it. All right. So that's really kind of the main point, is everyone's sort of getting on this bandwagon. So this is a really important part, is kind of who needs to comply. Fortunately, really small companies are pretty much excluded. Europe, doesn't matter how big you are. If you're trying to do business in Europe and you have one person from Europe, you have to comply with the GDPR. But at least for these United States laws, California, for instance, you have to have one of these three things that are circled. The first two columns are California, by the way. They have 2 laws already. Either have to have over 25 million in revenue or 50,000 people. And in January, they're actually upping that to 100,000 people in California. If you process that many people, then they say, all right, you're a small company, but you have more than 100,000 people, then okay, you've got to comply with this. Or the last one is, if you generate your revenue, more than 50% of your revenue, if more than half of your revenue is coming from selling information. So if you're like a marketing company or a marketing tool, marketing automation company, and you get revenue from selling that information, which means like you have a consortium and you share that advertising, right? The value that you're getting from that, the reason people would join your marketing consortium is to get that information from other marketers. And so they consider that a sale. So you would have to comply even if you're just a brand new startup. We won't get into the details, but the basic takeaway for Colorado, Connecticut, Utah, and Virginia that are all passed and going live in 2023 is pretty much they all follow California's lead. Utah has the $25 million limit. Most of the other ones are just the 100,000 record limit. And some of them have a different idea of, all right, if you're like Colorado says, if you're selling information or you make money by the sale of information, then we don't care how much it is, you have to comply. Other ones like Utah says, well, it has to be more than 50%. Virginia says has to be over 50%, but Connecticut says, well, 25%. So the point about this slide really isn't so much to try to remember all the details. It's just that as state laws are coming out, they're all a little bit different. And they all have a little bit different things. And part of the reason that Tyndall exists is because we're thinking, how is anyone going to keep track of all of this? And which states, all right, now I have to comply with Connecticut, but not Colorado yet, but then I do. And then Virginia, but not Utah. It just becomes a nightmare. Let's see. All right. So some basic things to do. Let me go back to that slide. Some basic things to do. How do we deal with this? Even if we don't have to comply yet, or if we do, there really are some basic things to do that at least don't have a target on you. You know what I mean? I came originally from the cybersecurity world, and in cybersecurity, the idea is you don't have to have an impenetrable wall. You just need to have a wall that's higher than the next guy's. It's maybe not the most socially conscious, but the idea is, right, nobody can have perfect security, but if your security is tougher than most companies, then they'll hack somebody else instead. And what I try to advise people to do is, it might take you years to do all the things, and I'm telling you, there's a lot of things to do in these privacy laws. You can at least do some things that don't paint a target on you that says, hey, all the law firms in California, why don't you come sue me? Things like, step one, you should at least know what personal data you're collecting and where it's coming from, who you're getting it from. Are you getting it from a third party or from your user? What are you using it for? And why are you doing it? Don't just collect data for any good reason, and don't just store it forever. And you should at least understand if you're selling it, because all of those laws have a whole separate set of provisions if you're selling data. So you should understand if you're doing that and know if you're doing it, what you're doing it, and why. Even if the laws don't maybe apply to you yet. One of the problems with all of these kind of laws is you might say, well, hey, we're only at 20 million, so we don't really hit the threshold of 25 million. Some class action law firm in California, they don't care. They're going to file a lawsuit and try to come after you. And you're going to say, well, we're not at 25 million yet. And they're like, yeah, hire a law firm and we'll see you in court. You can prove in court that you're not yet at 25 million, or I only have 80,000 people, not 100,000. And we're like, and they'll be like, well, no, you can prove in court that you only have 80,000. We'll see, we're going to file for discovery and get all of your data, and we're going to go through it all, and we're going to count and see if you really only have 80,000, right? So you don't necessarily want to wait till the last minute. You want to do some things and don't get a target on you. So knowing where your data is, have a privacy policy, post it on your website, and maybe even start deciding which of all the things that these 6 laws require you to do. Maybe decide, hey, are we going to do that for everybody? And just say, we're going to do that for everyone, or are we going to say we're only going to do those things for the states that pass those laws, and we're going to track everyone, and as various states come online with various laws, then we're going to turn on that functionality, which in a lot of ways could be more expensive, right? So start having these thoughts in your brain about do we just want to set up so that we offer this to everybody? Because you need to put that in your disclosure. One of the things the FTC just kills companies over is if you put something in your online disclosure and then you don't do it, man, they get you for false advertising, making false and misleading statements. It's really bad. So you want to like think through this stuff and put it in your privacy policy. And then you need to do what you say in your privacy policy. A third thing I would say to start thinking about doing is keeping a list of the third parties that you share information with. And this usually ends up being a lot more than people think. Um, Usually, if you did an audit of your website, there's a lot more marketing plugins, sales plugins, things from Google, LinkedIn, Facebook, marketing analytics companies. Those are all considered by these laws to be third parties that you're sharing information with, not just, HubSpot or ZoomInfo or something like that, which also are. And then if you are selling data, which is why I said that up in number one, if you are selling data, give people an opt-out. And I would suggest that even if you don't really meet the thresholds yet, let people opt out of the sale of their data. And the reason is because the California Attorney General has created a website where people can just go online and complain about you and say, hey, this website doesn't have do not sell my information button on it. They're not letting me opt out. You might say, well, hey, I don't meet the threshold, but that website generates a letter from the Attorney General's office that says you have 30 days to fix this or we might investigate you. And that's where the Sephora case even came from. They really do investigate these. So unless you want to get a letter from the Attorney General and have to hire a lawyer to write the Attorney General back and say we don't meet the thresholds of this law per this statute, blah, 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 right? It's going to cost you 20 grand just to hire a lawyer anyway. Like I said, it's better just don't have a target on you. Just post a privacy policy. If you sell information, let people opt out of the sale of the information. So at least they're not running to the California AG and saying, hey, these people aren't following the law. And then you have to say, hey, it doesn't apply to us yet, right? So just do some easy things like that. Definitely not everything that you need to do to comply, but those are the things that really just paint a big target on you. And it's right there on your public website. I don't know that we really want to go through this slide, but the main thing is just to point out that in these 6 states, they're basically saying you got to do the same things. Basically, if you have someone's information, you have to give them access. They have to be able to say, what data do you have on me? And you got like a month, 30 days to 45 days, depending on the law, to respond and go, okay, this is all the data we have on you. And some states say that you have to delete it if they say, well, I want you to delete that. Or I don't want you to sell my information. You have to let them opt out if you're selling the information. Those are kind of the basic things. But as you might guess, if you're into data or the product side, it actually isn't very easy to do that and to respond. And now you have to like save all of that communication. If someone says, I want you to delete my information, and you send them a letter saying, well, we can't because we use it for blah, 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 unless you want us to not have you as a customer anymore. You have to save those letters so that if people complain about you, you can say, no, here's all the complaints I got. Here's all the letters. And look, you can see by the dates that I responded within the amount of time, right? It isn't just doing it, it's keeping records of it so that if somebody complains about you, you can say, no, look at all my records. Look at my privacy policy. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. So there's a lot behind it. And so the things I'm talking about really aren't all of it, but those, like I said, are just some basic things. So I know that's a super fast overview of what's actually a fairly complicated topic, but when I send out the materials, there's a bunch of really interesting articles. Most people that I talk to are pretty shocked and blown away when they find out about really what's going on with people's privacy. Some people are really into this and all this already. This first article, I put it in there just because it's kind of fun and shocking. It's a really old article. It's more than 10 years old, but it tells you how long this stuff's been going on. Target had an algorithm that tracked what people bought and predicted if you were pregnant. And so one of them happened to be a teenage girl, and they started sending her, baby stuff. And the dad's like, why are you sending my 16-year-old baby stuff? And then he found out later that she actually was pregnant. He's like, wait a minute, how did Target know you were pregnant? Well, they have these algorithms that do what's called surveillance advertising, right? They gather data on all the things you buy and the things you're clicking on, what you're looking at. And they go, I think this person's going to file for divorce. I think this person might be pregnant. And then they start advertising. And so there's a lot of people that are getting really upset about this kind of stuff. Anyway, you can check out some of these articles because they're pretty interesting. Some of them a little bit older. Several of them are like within the last month. But if you want to, click on them and do some poking around, I welcome you to do that. So nobody interrupted me with any questions, which is totally fine. But I think I'm probably even a little over the 12 minutes, 15 minutes. I guess I should have been looking, but does anybody have any questions about any of that kind of stuff?
Well, thanks, Joe. This is awesome. Great information. I think there was a question in the chat around the enforcement of these laws. And then if anyone else has another question or two that you'd like to ask Joe, you can just unmute yourself and we can go for about five or so minutes on Q&A with Joe. But maybe just kick off the Q&A, Joe, with the question about what government entity enforces these laws.
So for the most part, state laws are always enforced by the state attorney general. Each state has its own attorney general, and they're responsible for enforcing these laws. California, it's actually been out a couple years now. So that second California law that's going into effect in January, that was passed last November, the CPRA, that law actually created a separate enforcement agency called the CPPA, the California Privacy Protection Agency. So that agency only exists to run around and get everybody in trouble. And by the way, their funding comes in large measure by the fines that they dish out. So the more they fine people, the more money they have to grow their agency. So they only have incentive to fine people and grow their agency, right? But for the most part, it's state's attorney general, at least right now, right? This thing is in its infancy. So I imagine more states will follow California's lead in the future.
Okay, thanks. Another question from Dale in the chat, and maybe I'll add a little bit to it as well. And this might be our last question for today, but everybody's welcome to reach out to Joe and contact him outside.
Sure.
But Joe, with your SaaS platform, can you talk a little bit about that? And then also yesterday when we were chatting, you kind of gave several options that companies have to address these laws. And I think the platform is probably also one of those solutions, but could you talk a little bit about what those options are for companies to address these laws and how your platform might work into that?
Well, yes. Your options, everyone's options are fairly limited because these are laws. And so most people, the very first option is, okay, we can hire a law firm. And we're going to have a law firm come in here and help us figure all this out for each of the various states. And pretty much nobody anywhere, including lawyers, want to do that. It's extraordinarily expensive, takes a really long time. What we did with our platform is we just took the subject matter expertise and kind of are making a TurboTax, if you will. We help you walk through the questions, but we give you privacy consulting with it. But it's really just like a TurboTax alternative, but it comes with a privacy expert. We help you kind of do most of it yourself. And the reason that's really more important than just saving money on hiring a law firm is that, as you might have guessed with some of that stuff, a lot of this stuff really requires ongoing sort of keeping records and maintaining what you do and keeping things up to date. And nobody wants to keep bringing lawyers back in to keep updating every time a new law comes out in a new state, or, like California passes a second law that changes things. If you have just like a TurboTax thing, it keeps you kind of up to date on all the laws and all that stuff. You don't have to keep redoing things. So for a lot of reasons, it just makes it simpler with kind of a TurboTax approach, if you will. Let's see. If it's like cybersecurity, it's fair to say it's incredibly hard to build a privacy program. After thresholds, yeah, it's definitely a lot harder to build it after the thresholds are met. But most companies, you're at 1, 2, 3, 4 million. A lot of times it's tempting to think, well, we don't really have money for that. We'll worry about it later. But of course, it costs you a whole lot more money to do it later. Whereas if you can just at least be aware of it and kind of build it in, it's really not that bad, especially if you have, kind of a do-it-yourself platform where you don't have to bring in a law firm or something. Have any integrations with other platforms? Not yet. That is absolutely one of the future plans, but we're a startup ourselves. But yeah, we would definitely build that in. Right now, we kind of do it manually. If people have a platform, we'll just do it ourselves. Sort of high service. We'll take your data and we'll put it in there ourselves at no charge, just to make it like it's integrated, even though it's not. But we're a startup, so we'll just put the extra work in.
Joe, I know that you kind of launched this idea of Tyndall inside of a law firm or a law firm lab, and now you're outside kind of on your own. Is it beneficial for companies to work with you either through their attorney or in conjunction with their attorney? Is that a good relationship for a small company to be
Absolutely.
pursuing?
That's a perfect relationship. We do have an attorney who's a privacy person. We also have certified privacy professionals. There's an international agency that does certifications. However, it works perfectly hand in hand if you already have an in-house attorney. What I'll say is that most attorneys, if you go to them, they'll say, yeah, I'm not up on all the various privacy laws in all the states. They'll say, I'm a Utah attorney, I'm a Colorado attorney. I can tell you about Colorado's law, but I'm not going to even try to advise you on those other laws. So they're usually the main ones saying, oh yeah, we should partner with a company like Tyndall because they'll provide us the subject matter expertise, but I'll still be your attorney. So usually those work out really well where we're partnered. But where companies don't have an attorney, that's fine too. We're not your attorney, but we have attorneys and we can give you advice and consulting.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, I think in our conversation yesterday, Jeff, you came to mind as I believe you're still doing some kind of fractional in-house counsel work for startups, and it seemed like a potential good combination there, working with an attorney like you and Tyndall to address some of these, because it seems like a really heavy lift for smaller companies unless you have some guidance that someone like Jeff and you could propose.
Yeah. Hey, Taylor, you just interrupted my message that I was sending to Joe to connect for that very purpose. But I'm glad you did. So you're absolutely right. Yeah, this is an area. There are certain things that are specialties that your in-house attorneys, unless you're very large and have the specialists on board, they're not going to get into this stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. The only attorneys I've seen do it are, the second or third associate general counsel that focuses just on privacy, which means you got to be a pretty big company before you're hiring a full-time employee just to do privacy. So yeah, most companies just want a part-time, like a fractional privacy person kind of a thing. Yeah. I'd love to connect. So I'll definitely hook up with you, Jeff. Thanks.
Okay,
Yeah,
well, I think we'll close up for today, Joe, but this has been really helpful. I think someone asked how they can connect with you. If you want to either put your LinkedIn in the chat, and also Jeff or Joe is going to send us some documents that we'll send out to all the Midday Connect members, and we'll put his contact information in that email, if that's okay, Joe.
Yeah, I don't have LinkedIn pulled up, so I can't copy the URL right at the moment, but I'm about the only Rivest that you'd find. If you type Joe Rivest in, I'll be the first one, probably the only one that comes up, at least in the Western states. I think anyway, I've never met another
Look at
Rivest.
that.
But
Jeff's
yeah,
on your
type
team.
Joe
Got
Rivest
your
and I'll come
LinkedIn
up.
in there.
Oh, hey,
Jeff's on
thanks.
your team. Love it.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I didn't pull up LinkedIn, so yeah, thanks
No
for
worries.
that.
Awesome.
But yeah, I'm going to send out some materials that has a lot more detail in it, links, references, things like that. But yeah, connect with me through LinkedIn. But thanks, Taylor.
Perfect.
Appreciate the opportunity, and it's good to meet everyone.
Yeah, Joe, thanks so much. Everybody, thanks for coming. We've got a great speaker next year or next week. So check out your emails and LinkedIn for next week, but look forward to seeing you all. And Joe, thanks so much. This has been fantastic.
Hey, thanks everyone. Take care.
Thanks, Joe.